Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, September 14th. Also, a great pleasure to be joined today by two guests. One here in the studio. Kate Mays is an assistant professor at the University of Vermont in the technology field. She studies the dynamics of emergent technology in our civic, social, and interpersonal lives. Kate, welcome to GNAT. Thank you for making the drive down from Burlington today.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Also, a real pleasure to be joined today by Stephen Pappas, the editor of the Rutland Herald and Barrie Times-Argus. Steve is no stranger to GNAT, having been on here a couple of times before. Steve, great to have you back again.
Always glad to be with you, Andrew.
So our topic today is about artificial intelligence and how it applies or will apply, or maybe is already being applied to journalism. I've already seen a couple of articles published in magazines with a comment or a note saying that this article was actually written by an actual person, not by a machine or a large language model program like ChatGPT. So clearly artificial intelligence or generative AI, generative artificial intelligence is going to have a large impact on journalism, like it probably will on many fields. So we're really grateful to have our two guests here to help us unpack how that may unfold or already is unfolding. And Kate, I thought I could start with you and just have you give us sort of the big picture of what is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, sure. So AI can mean a lot of things and encompass a lot of different kinds of tasks. Typically, in a broad definition, AI are computer systems that can do tasks that we would normally think require human intelligence. So some examples of that would be image recognition, being able to identify, say, a school bus from a car, something like that, which is visual perception, speech recognition. So if we talk into Siri and it's able to transcribe our voice to text, that is an example of AI. Decision-making, making predictions, and also automatic language translation. All of these are examples of AI that we've been, that's been around for a while now in our daily lives. More recently, the big hype around AI has been the release of these generative AI models like ChatGPT, which are based on large language models, which essentially means huge data sets, larger than like billions of data points. Basically, the lay term is sort of all of the internet. All the information on the internet is going into these large databases, and then we're using the scientists, OpenAI, all these companies, Google, Microsoft, that are creating these LLMs are using a lot of complicated deep learning techniques. So a lot of layers of different kinds of learning, trying to find patterns in the data to then be able to predict text or generate images, as we're seeing in some of these systems.
Complicated stuff,
Yes.
Way over my head, I can tell you that much. But Steve, fortunately we have you here to tell us, how do you see this technology already kind of impacting the field of journalism?
So we're seeing bits and pieces of it, certainly on the national landscape. There have been a handful of newspapers that have, including here in Vermont, who have attempted to produce articles and commentaries out of AI. We have been reluctant to do so. Let me back up. The technology, we need technology to be moving forward in journalism in a way that allows us to do our jobs most effectively. We produce the newspaper on the cloud, as it's called, remotely, so that my staff doesn't actually need to be in the bustling newsroom anymore. They can be scattered all about. In addition to that, they are using recorders, often on their phones, that allow them to make audio memos of interviews or take pictures of documents and have those documents scanned. Their phones essentially become scanners. And then they can use transcription programs, apps, that allow them to not have to listen and transcribe the entire interview again. They can just run the interview through this transcription app, and it is quite accurate. I mean, they certainly have to go back and clean it up. But that saves a tremendous amount of time from when reporters used to just take copious notes and then transcribe those notes or transcribe those interviews from audio recordings. So they are able to save time doing that. The next phase of this, logically, would be that those transcriptions would then be put into some kind of AI, generative AI, and produce stories. But fortunately, and I say fortunately very strongly, the technology is not there. You still need that human element to be able to pull together the various parts of the story. You would need a pretty rigorous algorithm to be able to parse out from piles of transcriptions from various individuals what needs to go into a news story. So the human element of it is still very important. And while we appreciate the changes in technology, the bigger issue, and I think we'll probably talk about this in a minute, is trust, is bias and trust, and is AI coming up with a cleaner, more objective version of something potentially, or is it handpicked and skewing information in a certain direction? And we as journalists, I've got the gray hair to suggest that I'm a little skeptical of AI and its potential for what we can do right now. But there are individuals in the news industry that are leaning into it. And the Associated Press, as a matter of fact, just recently adopted guidelines for AI use among their membership. We could talk a little bit about that in more detail, but industry-wide, we are cautiously optimistic that this will become a tool that can enhance the work that we're doing, but we certainly do not want AI to replace the role of reporter, rewrite desk, editor, any of those things, because we feel that human element is what makes the decisions about newsworthiness and the decisions about what goes into stories, and more importantly, what doesn't go into stories, because meetings can be repetitive. Things that we report on every day are very repetitive, and it requires a human element of editing.
Can't we hear a lot about the importance of prompts in conducting searches using a chat program or a large language model program? Can you tell us a bit about that? Why is a prompt so important to determining what the program is going to come up with?
Sure. Yeah, so a prompt is essentially an instruction to the LLM, ChatGPT, for what kind of output you would like it to give. So for example, if I wanted to write a poem about autumn in Vermont, I would say, ChatGPT, can you please compose for me a poem about autumn in Vermont? And likely what you would get is a pretty banal poem about autumn in Vermont that's maybe not very interesting, might be nice if maybe someone in middle school wrote it, but not really quite impressive beyond that. And so as the human sort of element in this, then I could iterate on that prompt, say poem isn't really up to my standards, and I might decide to ask it to write a poem about autumn in Vermont in the style of Robert Frost. And there you might actually get a poem that's actually quite good. But it's important to understand that the ChatGPT it's good at that kind of in the style of, because the LLM is essentially a pattern recognition machine. And so it has a lot of Robert Frost poems and other poems that are perhaps in the genre of Robert Frost that it can draw from to synthesize to create sort of a nice facsimile of a poem written by Robert Frost about autumn in Vermont. And so to Steve's point about the importance of the human element, that's really where we're seeing it's important to have human judgment about, one, maybe it's better to have a poem about autumn in Vermont in the style of Robert Frost versus in the style of some other poet where maybe that wouldn't mesh as well with the topic. And you're seeing actually jobs for prompt engineers that actually pay quite well. And so there does seem to be some acknowledgement that it's really important to have that human judgment in how we are shaping the ultimate output from these kinds of models.
Steve, back to you. I guess I just wonder, what are you seeing as some of the possible upside benefits of all of this? Assuming the human element piece is determined, it seems like a chat program could help a reporter write a story a lot more quickly.
As far as I'm aware, it's not happening on a regular basis. And maybe Kate can speak to examples where it might be, but I don't believe in any mainstream or large news organization they're using AI for any kind of original generation of content. Now, when I said earlier I was cautiously optimistic and that we need to be leaning into these tools, journalism is, for the most part, is quite formulaic. How we write news stories there is a formula to it. It may not be readily apparent to the public, but to journalists, the who, what, when, where, why, and then the most important elements of a story, the lead paragraph, the nut graph, and all of those things are at the top of the story. But being able to parse, as I said, the important pieces out and plug them in a meaningful way, I think we're quite a long way from that happening. I think that you can have AI generating commentaries. I think you could have AI generating editorials, perhaps, based on sets of facts and criteria. But we don't want that. We don't want somebody else making those decisions when it comes to the dissemination of information. The whole point of having journalists do the work is that the information is being vetted, it's being checked, it's being verified. And while, sure, we would love to be able to say that we're producing more content, we don't want to be producing content for the sake of producing content. We could just be cutting and pasting press releases at this point right now, if that was the criteria. What you're looking for is somebody who can provide a narrative that, again, is ranking information in a meaningful kind of way and putting it into a narrative. I wrote an editorial that appeared on the 22nd of August that was actually very clear. It appeared in both the Times-Argus and the Rutland Herald that stated emphatically that we are not using AI in our newsrooms, and our policy is going to be that we won't, because we are concerned that people already don't trust news sources, don't trust the media. We don't need to give them more reasons to question whether or not this was really written by a reporter or it was written by AI. We want people to rely on us and feel like the information we're providing is indispensable to them. And I think if you are letting AI potentially produce the content, you have just taken away the leverage that you have in being indispensable to the community.
Well, I was wondering, do you think it might make writing like investigative pieces where you'd have to crunch like large reams of data to write a piece? Might that be one application you could see it fitting into in an ethical way and in a trustworthy way, but that would make a long, complicated story perhaps easier to write? So,
like I said, AP has just recently put out guidelines that they're saying that they're encouraging their membership to use, and part of those guidelines is, using it to digest large reports and kind of quantitative information. But they're telling folks, but make sure you check it. So there's still that somebody still has to go back and verify the information in one form or another. The digesting of the information, yeah, I mean, it's great that there are entities out there that can do that, but old school journalists there's going to be a shift. The old school journalists are going to want to rely on the human element, and I need to have more faith in that. The next generation is going to want to save time, produce more, and be able to use AI to do the heavy, part of that heavy lifting for them. Fortunately, I don't think that in journalism in its current form, that what we do will ever go away entirely. I think it will always have some kind of an element of verification and certainly, that vetting process. Kate may be able to speak more into, how the algorithms and the prompts can change to be more specific for broader things. But for right now, I don't see it affecting us directly, except that I know that I have staff who are worried that, they could be replaced by a prompt.
Yeah, I think in terms of where it's being used already, things like having an algorithm process financial reports and then producing a kind of rote summary of all the financial reports, that's already being done. I've also heard of AI being used to monitor social media, to be able to maybe identify stories a little bit ahead of when they break, to give journalists a little bit more time. Also potentially could be used to produce a pretty standard sports report, recap of a sports game, that kind of thing. But in terms of where I really don't think it can replace humans, and I don't think anyone would say that they aspire to be writing the sports recap or whatever. So maybe that is a good thing, that there's sort of this low-hanging fruit for AI to be doing kind of more of the tedious tasks. But where it really can't replace humans is in the development of relationships with sources and with the community, particularly in local news. I think understanding the community and how to find stories is critical. Particularly, we were talking about trust of the audience's trust in a news report. But there's also, especially in investigative reporting, trust from the sources, that they will remain anonymous and their information private is critical, I imagine. It's been a long time since I've actually done any journalism, but critical to sources being willing to reveal that information. And I can't imagine, maybe in a really long time, but I can't imagine anyone would trust a kind of AI that's reaching out to people asking for information, because fundamentally the whole point of AI is that it collects everyone's data and keeps it to be using in the future. So there's those kinds of human elements that really are not automatable at all.
One of the concerns I keep hearing about are the deep fakes, where video or audio could be manipulated to have someone saying something completely different from what they were actually saying. Is that something you're worried about or thinking about as you follow this whole field?
Yeah, tremendously. The deepfakes are increasingly getting better and better, and the technical solutions for being able to identify deepfakes, I don't think will ever, consistently outpace the development of more sophisticated deepfake technology. I will say, I think in 2015, I was more concerned about that kind of technology than I am today, simply because of the way in the last 5 years we've seen how people can say, you can have literal recordings of people saying something and then someone else saying, no, I didn't say that. And that doesn't seem to move the needle much. There's a deeper issue in our country, at least, where there's people choose not to believe information that's right in front of them simply because of other cognitive biases they might have or beliefs. And that, I think, is a deeper issue. I mean, deepfakes can exploit that sensibility, right? It's easier to believe a deep fake if it is already aligning with something that you believe in. But also we've seen that even when there's true, real evidence to the contrary of someone's opinion, it may not sway them.
I guess deepfakes are more of a video kind of thing, so probably not so much a factor in the print newspaper world.
But to Kate's point, you could have a deep fake. It comes down to, again, that verifying the information, because you could have somebody alter audio so that it sounds like Andrew McKeever saying it, but it might not be Andrew McKeever saying it at all. I mean, that technology is there right now. You and I could have an audio conversation and it wouldn't be me at all, potentially. The video piece, I think, is a little more challenging in longer form, but one of the things that struck me when Kate was talking about the gathering of the information and the holding the information, it suddenly dawned on me that, well, what if a group of liars all just started putting the lies out in mass form? And we kind of have already seen that happening, that these disinformation campaigns. AI is going to trust the information that it has gathered, and even if it's all lies, and if you ask it to regurgitate that into some semblance of a narrative, it's going to do is regurgitate the lies. And so it's relying on the trust of the source as much as a reporter or a human being is in doing it. And then if all of a sudden we're disseminating that information out there, we're culpable. I mean, I'm getting a little twitchy just thinking about, the definition of libel is, willingly disseminating information that is inaccurate. And if you as a journalist or a news organization can't put a stamp of approval on this, that you trust all that information, you're setting yourself up for some big problems, potentially, opening yourself up for liability, both in slander and libel.
Interesting point. Boy, a lot of levels to the onion here on this one. I guess, Kate, I'm just wondering, there's been an awful lot of conversation, discussion about this in general, and a lot of projections of sort of this science fiction-y future, this dystopian future where, with AI, computers will become so powerful and strong that they're basically running everything. Is that a concern or a fear you share, or do you think is it just too early to tell?
I think it's a little too early to be. Well, I'll put it this way. I think there are more immediate and important concerns to address with how AI threatens people or our social lives than these kinds of long-term existential threats. I also, it's notable that a lot of the people who raise these long-term existential threats are also the ones at the forefront of developing the technology. I can't square that one bit. But I think the more immediate term threats that we're already seeing are bias, as well as potentially a kind of mechanization of our own human skills. So something that I'm concerned about in the journalism realm, for example, is if increasingly tasks are offloaded to AI and we rely more on that the kind of expectations for the craft of what journalism is becomes increasingly dehumanized. And we don't value, it sort of shifts our values in terms of what we expect of journalism and its service in our democracy. So those are, I'm more concerned about that kind of issue in terms of a values alignment of, why do we value journalism? What is its purpose? How can AI be implemented in a way that serves those values and that purpose? And I think a big issue in why I'm a little pessimistic about the human values kind of prevailing is the business incentives that are maybe in opposition to that, because AI is cheap and humans are not. But again, to this point of what is the purpose, it's like, why are we trying to potentially replace, why would we want to replace journalists? What are they going to do? To what end, ultimately, with a lot of this development? And so Steve's first point about these tools being augmentations of the process rather than replacement, I think is something that we all want. And I would love to see more kind of a broader consensus around that from all stakeholders in journalism.
Mm-hmm. Steve, in the minute or two that we have left, I wanted to return to a point you made earlier about trust in newspapers, trust in news media. We've heard an awful lot of charges of quote-unquote fake news and whatnot, smears almost against really reputable newspapers and news organizations. I guess I just wondered, how do you think the industry is going to kind of break out of that? And well, it seems like there are a lot of institutions across the country that are struggling with trust issues in the general public. The media is certainly one. What do newspapers and news organizations need to do to kind of recapture that trust that used to exist? Or is that kind of representative of an era, back in the 1950s, 1960s, when there were three television stations and a couple of highly regarded newspapers, and it was a lot simpler than what we have now with thousands of social media apps out there?
Well, to your point, news organizations need to stop overreaching and stop trying to do things that they're not good at. And what they are good at is community building and covering the things in their community. And if they do those things well, and again, they become indispensable to the communities they serve and provide an accurate representation, good, bad, and ugly, of what's going on in their community, and they do it fairly and they do it accurately, that's the best that anybody can ask for. You can't ask for anyone, you can't demand somebody to trust you. You have to build the trust, you have to build the respect, and you do that through good hard work. And a lot of papers have tried to be more utilitarian and kind of reach out and tap into things that they think that the audiences want. But fundamentally, we've lost more than 2,100 newspapers in this nation since 2015, I believe. And that's a lot, that's a huge number and that's a huge amount of news deserts now being created. And as long as news organizations, I feel like, are really focusing on the things that they can do well, and that may be sports, it may be arts, it may be news. It's hard to tell what it is in each demographic, but if they're doing it well and they're doing it fairly and accurately, then you would hope that would be enough. It probably won't be, but it's the only way that news organizations are going to survive, is to focus on their community and being community driven.
Okay, well, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there for today. I got a feeling we could all talk about this for a lot longer, but we'll have to leave it there for now. But I wanted to thank Kate Mays, an assistant professor at the University of Vermont, who studies emergent technology, and Stephen Pappas, the editor of the Rutland Herald and Barrie Times-Argus. And thanks to you as well for being with us. Hope you found our program interesting. Thank you for sharing part of your day with us. And we'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care.